Hello, this is Professor Teresa Pelkie. This is Session 7, Part 1, Case Expressions. With this video, we'll start the third session that covers some of the features you can use when selecting data from a table. This video will show you how to work with case expressions. A case expression lets you perform calculations on values. It can be used in a column list, in the order by clause, and in the where clause. In the second video, we'll look at aggregate functions and the count function. These functions let you get a quick look at simple statistics in your data. In the third video of this session, we'll work with the distinct keyword. Distinct lets us quickly find unique values in a table. To get started, we'll look at this simple select statement. This select is over the country language table, and it selects all of the columns in that table using the explicit column names. Note that the isOfficial value is returned as the letter T or the letter F for true or false. And now we've changed the select statement to use a case expression. This select statement also runs over the country language table, and it still selects all of the columns in the table. Let's start by looking at the result grid. Here you can see that the isOfficial column has been replaced by a column name of official. Notice also that the values in the column are now the words yes and no, compared with the letters T or F that you saw on the previous slide. The values T and F are the actual values that are stored in the table. What we've done here is to transform those values into a more human-friendly format like the words yes and no, rather than the computer-like T and F. So let's look at the case expression in more detail. Here you see the complete case expression that was used on the previous slide in the select statement. A case expression starts with the keyword case and it ends with the keyword end. In this type of case expression, the case keyword is immediately followed by the column name that we want to work with. In this example, the work that we want to do with the official column is to translate the value into a yes or no value. A case expression contains one or more when-then clauses. If you've worked with other programming languages, you can see how this is just like an if-then statement. You may have also used case-like statements in other languages, although the construct is sometimes used with the keyword switch or select. The when clause is interpreted like this. When the value of the isOfficial column is the letter T, then the result value of the case expression is the word yes. The same applies to the second when. When the value of the isOfficial column is the letter F, then the result value of the case expression is the word no. Now there are a few things to note about case expressions. First, they are like functions in that a value is returned as the result of evaluating the expression. Second, only one of the when-then clauses will return the value. In this example, it is easier to see that the value will be one or the other, either yes or no. However, if you write a very complicated case expression, you need to understand that the first when clause that evaluates to true will return the value in the then clause. After evaluating the when clause as true, the value specified in the then clause is returned and the case expression is done. Any remaining when clauses are not examined. You need to be aware of how the evaluation of when clauses is done because you might write a complicated case expression and not get expected results. When that happens, you should first check to make sure that you have specified when clauses in the correct order so that they will be evaluated correctly. You usually won't have any problem with order of evaluation when you are performing an is-equal comparison. For example, the two when clauses shown on this slide are using implied is-equal comparisons. When isOfficial is equal to T, then return yes. The problem with case expression order of evaluation usually occurs when you are performing a comparison using greater than or less than operators, including greater than or equal to and less than or equal to. When you use those operators, you need to be sure you put the when clauses in the correct order so that the comparisons are done in order. Remember, the first when clause that is evaluated as true is used to return the value. Back to the slide. In this example, there are only two possible values for the isOfficial column. That is because isOfficial is defined in the country language table as a MySQL enum data type, with only the values T and F allowed, and the default value is F. Sometimes you will need to work with a column in a case expression where you won't know all of the possible values. In that case, you write when-then expressions for the values that you know and that you want to return a result for. For the unknown values, you can write a final else clause after all of the when-then clauses. The else clause returns a value if none of the when clauses evaluated to true. You'll see an example of an else clause on the next slide. Finally, following the end keyword, you see the as keyword. This is a simple column alias keyword, and it means that we are returning the result of the case expression in a column named official. Another type of case expression is referred to as a search case, as opposed to the simple case that we saw on the previous slides. A search case is used when you need to evaluate a column value for something more than a simple equality comparison. To get started, look at the result grid. This is showing cities in California sorted by the city name. You see there is a city size column at the right side of the grid to indicate if the city is a small city, a medium city, a large city, or a big city. The values shown in that column are based on the values in the population column. So we are comparing the population value to determine if it will be used for a small, medium, large, or big city. Now look back up at the select. Once again, you see that the keyword case appears in the column list. But this time, the case keyword is not immediately followed by a column name. Instead, it is followed by the first when-then clause. The reason why the population column does not immediately follow the case keyword is because we need to perform comparisons on the population column. To perform a comparison, for example, to determine if the population is less than 100,000, we need to create a valid comparison operator. You can see that the comparison operator in the first when clause, when population less than 100,000. Again, if you read this as an if-then statement, you would say, if the population is less than 100,000, then return the value small city. The next two when clauses continue to perform comparisons on the population column, but this time, the comparisons are performed using the between operator. As you learned in the previous session, the between operator is used to specify an inclusive range of values. For example, the first when clause with a between operator checks for the population between 100,000 and 250,000. It is the same as using the comparison operators if the population is greater or equal to 100,000 and less or equal to 250,000. If the value is within that range, the return value is medium city. The third when-then clause also uses a between operator, this time to determine if it's a large city. Now notice what happens after the third when-then clause. In the three when-then clauses, we've checked for populations less than 100,000 in the range 100,000 to 250,000, and in the range 250,001 up to 999,999. After that, we are no longer interested in checking the population. If we have gone through the 3 when-then clauses and none of them were used, then the city is, by our definition, a big city. So here we simply use an else clause. That's all there is to it. The word else followed by the value to return. It is true that we could have written another when-then clause. We could have said when population greater or equal to 1 million. But the else clause is simpler and it reduces some of the clutter in the code. Now we'll look at some other places where you can use a case expression. You can use a case expression in an order by clause to control the sort order. For example, let's say that you wanted to get a list of countries from the country table in order by hemisphere and country name. The hemisphere is Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere. The problem is the country table does not contain a column that indicates which of those hemispheres the country is located in. However, we can use the continent and region columns to derive the hemisphere. Using a search case like the one shown here, we can assign a sort value based on the continent and region. We need to consider the region because there are some countries on the continent of Africa that are in the Northern Hemisphere and some that are in the Southern Hemisphere. So the when clauses are easy to understand. We are comparing the continent names and for Africa, the continent and region names. But what is the meaning of the result values, 0 and 1, for the then clause? Keep in mind a case expression will return a value. In this case expression, the only values that will be returned will be a number 0 or a number 1. If the continent is evaluated as being in the Northern Hemisphere, the number 0 is returned. If the continent is evaluated as being in the Southern Hemisphere, the number 1 is returned. So the order by clause will have an implied column with a value of either 0 or 1. I say implied because we do not actually have a hemisphere column, but we are assigning a value to indicate which hemisphere to use based on the result of the case expression. The end result is we are simply telling the order by that the first implied column value is going to be 0 or 1. That's an easy thing to sort by. All of the countries with an implied hemisphere value of 0 will be sorted first. Then the countries with the implied hemisphere value of 1. Following the end statement, there is a comma and then the column name named. In other words, we are sorting first by the implied hemisphere value, then the country name. You can see the results on the left side. This shows an alphabetical list of countries. On the right side, we are running the same select statement. This just shows the result grid further down. At the red bracket, you can see that we go from Yugoslavia, which used to be the name of a country, to American Samoa. That is the break between the hemispheres, where the values went from 0 to 1. As soon as we used up all of the Northern Hemisphere countries, we start with the Southern Hemisphere countries in alphabetical order. Now, granted, it would be more useful to also see the hemisphere value in the result grid. To make that value appear, you would also need to code a similar case expression in the column list. Finally, we'll take a look at using a case expression in a where clause. This slide shows the case expression on the left and the equivalent where clause using and or operators on the right. Both of the select statements produce the same results as shown in the result grids. From this example, you can see that the case expression on the left can be used to simplify the where clause. The purpose of the where clause is to select countries with a population of over 2 million. The country also has to be in North America and have a life expectancy over 75, or in South America and have a life expectancy over 72. As shown, you can write the where clause either way. Some people might prefer the relative simplicity of the case expression. Others might prefer the more traditional style shown on the right. Note that on the right, there are some required and some optional parentheses used to control how the Boolean logic is applied to the and or clauses. In the next video, we'll look at the aggregate and count functions.